Empress Elizabeth of Austria, affectionately known as Sisi, spent her early childhood in a relatively free-spirited and untraditional environment, especially for someone who would later enter European royalty. Born on December 24, 1837, in Munich, Bavaria, she was the fourth of 10 children of Duke Maximilian of Bavaria and Princess Ludovica of Bavaria. The family lived at Possenhofen Castle on Lake Starnberg, a picturesque setting that allowed Sisi and her siblings to grow up surrounded by nature. Sisi's father, Duke Maximilian, was unconventional and bohemian, with little interest in the formalities of court life. Known for his eccentric personality, he favored traveling, horseback riding, and engaging with the arts, qualities that influenced Sisi from an early age. Her mother, Ludovica, was the more pragmatic of the two, though still liberal in her approach to raising the children compared to other aristocratic families of the time. As a child, Sisi was allowed to roam freely, spending much of her time outdoors. This lifestyle helped cultivate her love for nature, animals, and physical activity, setting the stage for the lifelong commitment to exercise and beauty routines that later defined her. She was often described as shy and introverted, preferring the company of her family and animals to the rigid social structures of the aristocratic world. The relaxed atmosphere of her childhood, however, meant Sisi was largely unprepared for the demands of court life when she became engaged to her cousin, Emperor Franz Joseph I of Austria, at age 15. The simplicity and freedom she enjoyed as a child would become something she longed for throughout her adult life, as she struggled to adapt to the formal, restrictive environment of the Austrian court. The meeting and engagement of Empress Sisi to Emperor Franz Joseph I was both romantic and unexpected. In 1853, Sisi was only 15 years old when she accompanied her mother, Princess Ludovica of Bavaria, and her older sister Helene to the Austrian resort town of Bad Ischl. The purpose of the visit was for Franz Joseph to meet Helene, whom his mother, Archduchess Sophie, had arranged as a potential bride. However, things did not go according to plan. At their first meeting, Franz Joseph's attention was immediately drawn to the young, lively, and beautiful Sisi, rather than her elder sister. Sisi's natural charm, coupled with her striking appearance, dark hair, large expressive eyes, and shy demeanor, captivated the young emperor. Despite the original intentions of his mother, Franz Joseph quickly made his preference clear. After their first encounter, he expressed his wish to marry Sisi instead of Helene. Franz Joseph's strong affection for Sisi won over his mother, who reluctantly approved of the match, despite Sisi's youth and lack of preparation for court life. Sisi was not only younger than expected but also unaccustomed to the formalities required for an empress. Nevertheless, on August 19, 1853, Franz Joseph announced his engagement to Sisi, which caused a sensation within the Austrian aristocracy. Sisi, on the other hand, was overwhelmed by the sudden turn of events. She had never imagined herself as an empress, and the prospect of leaving her free-spirited Bavarian lifestyle to become part of the strict Austrian court frightened her. Still, she accepted the engagement, driven by the strong affection of the emperor. The couple was married less than a year later, on April 24, 1854, in a grand ceremony in Vienna. Although their engagement and marriage began with genuine romantic feelings, the differences between Sisi's carefree upbringing and the rigid expectations of the Habsburg court soon became apparent, marking the start of Sisi's lifelong struggle with court life. Empress Sisi's marriage to Emperor Franz Joseph I took place on April 24, 1854, in a grand ceremony in Vienna. At just 16 years old, Sisi was thrust into a life of royal duty and scrutiny, leaving behind her beloved home in Bavaria for the austere Habsburg court. The wedding was a lavish affair, attended by thousands and celebrated with great splendor, signifying the union of Bavaria and Austria, and bringing a young, beautiful empress to the Austrian people. Although the marriage began with genuine affection, Franz Joseph was deeply in love with Sisi. Their relationship was soon strained by the pressures and expectations of court life. Sisi, who had been raised in a relatively unstructured environment, struggled to adapt to the strict rules and protocols of the Viennese court. Archduchess Sophie, Franz Joseph's domineering mother, had a particularly significant influence, often interfering in the young couple's life. Sophie took control over much of Sisi's daily routine, even managing her personal decisions and closely supervising the raising of Sisi's children. The court's expectations placed a tremendous burden on Sisi, who found herself constrained by the endless formalities and isolated from the support system she had back in Bavaria. Her delicate health began to suffer under the stress, and she experienced periods of depression and anxiety, conditions that would persist throughout her life. Despite the personal challenges in her marriage, Sisi bore 4 children: Sophie, Gisela, Rudolph, the heir to the throne, and Marie Valerie. However, the marriage faced additional strain after the death of her first daughter, Sophie, at just 2 years old during a journey to Hungary. This loss deepened Sisi's disillusionment with court life and strained her relationship with Franz Joseph, as she blamed the court's decisions for her daughter's death. Over time, Sisi and Franz Joseph grew apart, with Sisi spending long periods away from Vienna, traveling across Europe and seeking solace and independence. Though the two maintained a deep bond of respect, Sisi's quest for freedom often conflicted with Franz Joseph's dedication to his role as emperor. Their marriage thus became emblematic of Sisi's life, caught between her duties as empress and her desire for freedom and self-expression. Empress Sisi's first child, Archduchess Sophie of Austria, was born on March 5, 1855, just a year after Sisi's marriage to Emperor Franz Joseph I. The birth of her first daughter brought mixed emotions. Although Sisi was overjoyed to become a mother, her role and authority as a parent were quickly overshadowed by her mother-in-law, Archduchess Sophie, who exercised significant control over the household. Archduchess Sophie had strong opinions on child-rearing and was very protective of the Habsburg dynasty. She took it upon herself to oversee little Sophie's upbringing, believing that Sisi was too young, inexperienced, and unprepared to raise a child within the strict customs of the Austrian court. In fact, Sophie is said to have even claimed the baby as her own, giving her the name Sophie and sometimes referring to her as "my daughter." This undermining of Sisi's role as a mother strained her relationship with her mother-in-law and deepened her sense of isolation within the court. In 1857, when Sophie was only 2 years old, Sisi, Franz Joseph, and their 2 young daughters, Sophie and her younger sister, Gisela, traveled to Hungary. However, tragedy struck during this visit when both children fell ill, likely from typhus or dysentery. Sadly, little Sophie did not survive, and she passed away in her mother's arms on May 29, 1857. The loss devastated Sisi, who blamed herself and the court for permitting such a dangerous journey for her children. Sophie's death left an enduring impact on Sisi, heightening her anxiety and sense of alienation from the court. This tragic event marked the beginning of Sisi's struggle with depression and her lifelong dissatisfaction with the constraints imposed by her royal role and family. After the loss of her first daughter, Sophie, Empress Sisi of Austria began to experience growing isolation and persistent health issues, which would haunt her throughout her life. The death of her daughter was a profound emotional blow, amplifying Sisi's dissatisfaction with the rigid environment of the Habsburg court. She became increasingly withdrawn, feeling trapped in a role that forced her to conform to strict protocols, leaving little room for personal freedom or self-expression. Sisi's mother-in-law, Archduchess Sophie, continued to exert control over Sisi's life and the upbringing of her remaining children, further fueling Sisi's feelings of helplessness and frustration. The court's expectations required her to fulfill public and ceremonial roles that drained her physically and mentally. Sisi's emotional turmoil started manifesting in physical symptoms, including migraines, chronic coughing, and what was described at the time as a nervousness, likely early signs of depression and anxiety. In response, Sisi turned to a strict regimen of exercise, diet, and beauty routines as a means of regaining some personal control. She became known for her almost obsessive dedication to her physical appearance, spending hours each day on activities like horseback riding, gymnastics, and long walks. While these routines provided temporary relief and gave her a sense of discipline, they also contributed to her isolation, as she increasingly avoided social gatherings and interactions with the court. In her search for peace, Sisi began traveling extensively, often leaving Vienna for extended periods. She spent time in places like Madeira, Corfu, and England, where she could escape the pressures of her position. Her health gradually became an excuse for these absences, as she claimed that traveling was necessary for her well-being. Sisi's preference for solitude and her frequent absences only fueled rumors and criticisms within the court and among the public, who saw her travels as neglect of her royal duties. Though Emperor Franz Joseph loved Sisi deeply, her growing isolation strained their relationship as he remained dedicated to his role as ruler and bound to Vienna. As the years went by, Sisi's health continued to decline, both physically and mentally, leaving her increasingly disconnected from her role as empress. This period of isolation and health struggles marked a shift in her life, as she began to embody a tragic figure, a beautiful yet melancholic empress, caught between duty and the pursuit of personal freedom. Crown Prince Rudolf, the third child and only son of Empress Sisi and Emperor Franz Joseph I, was born on August 21, 1858, in Vienna. His birth was highly celebrated, as he provided the Habsburg dynasty with a long-awaited male heir. However, his arrival did not bring Empress Sisi much relief or satisfaction, as her relationship with the imperial court and her role as a mother continued to be challenged by her domineering mother-in-law, Archduchess Sophie. From the moment of Rudolf's birth, Archduchess Sophie assumed control over his upbringing, determined to mold him into a suitable heir. Just as she had with Sisi's two daughters, Sophie dictated nearly every aspect of Rudolf's life, selecting his nannies, tutors, and controlling his schedule. She viewed Sisi as too emotional and unfit to raise a future emperor, which further strained the relationship between mother and son. Sisi often felt powerless and excluded, watching from a distance as Rudolf was raised under the strict influence of the imperial court. Despite her desire to be close to her son, Sisi found it difficult to build a strong bond with Rudolf. When she did manage to spend time with him, she noticed he was sensitive, intelligent, and somewhat rebellious, qualities that clashed with the militaristic and conservative values instilled by his tutors and Archduchess Sophie. Recognizing her son's struggles, Sisi tried to intervene in his education when he grew older, advocating for a more progressive upbringing. However, her efforts were largely ignored by the court, and Rudolf's upbringing continued in a restrictive and authoritarian manner. As Rudolf matured, he became increasingly isolated and conflicted, feeling the weight of the expectations placed on him and struggling with the lack of understanding from those closest to him. This early disconnect from his mother and the harshness of his education contributed to Rudolf's later disillusionment and mental health struggles, which culminated in the tragic Mayerling incident in 1889, when he died in a murder-suicide pact with his lover, Mary Vetsera. Rudolf's birth brought both hope and hardship to Sisi's life, deepening her resentment toward the court and her sense of isolation as a mother. His complex and ultimately tragic life would later haunt Sisi, intensifying her melancholy and further estranging her from the Habsburg court and its expectations. Empress Sisi's coronation as Queen of Hungary on June 8, 1867, was a pivotal event in her life, both personally and politically. This coronation symbolized her bond with Hungary and marked her growing influence within the Habsburg Empire. Sisi had long felt a kinship with the Hungarian people and had developed a strong friendship with Count Gyula Andrássy, a prominent Hungarian noble and nationalist. Unlike the Austrian court, which Sisi found cold and restrictive, the Hungarian nobility offered her warmth, respect, and a sense of belonging. The backdrop to Sisi's coronation as Queen of Hungary was the Austro-Hungarian Compromise of 1867, also known as the Ausgleich. This agreement restructured the Habsburg Empire into a dual monarchy, giving Hungary equal status with Austria and allowing it greater autonomy while retaining the emperor's rule. Sisi played a significant role in facilitating this compromise by using her influence with her husband, Emperor Franz Joseph. Her support for Hungarian independence and her strong rapport with Hungarian leaders were instrumental in bridging the divide between Austria and Hungary. On the day of the coronation, Sisi and Franz Joseph were crowned King and Queen of Hungary in a grand ceremony held at Matthias Church in Budapest. The event was filled with traditional Hungarian customs, which Sisi embraced wholeheartedly. She wore a magnificent gown decorated with symbols of Hungary, and the royal couple took their oaths in Hungarian, further endearing her to the Hungarian people. As Queen of Hungary, Sisi gained significant political influence and was beloved by the Hungarian people, who saw her as an ally and advocate for their autonomy. This special relationship with Hungary became a source of joy and purpose for Sisi, who, up until this point, had struggled with the rigid expectations of Austrian court life. Hungary provided her a sense of freedom and respect she seldom found in Vienna. Following the coronation, Sisi spent much of her time in Hungary, often residing at the GDLL Palace, a royal residence gifted to her and Franz Joseph by the Hungarian government. Hungary became a place of refuge for Sisi, where she could escape the stifling environment of the Austrian court and live with greater independence. Her role as Queen of Hungary marked a turning point in her life, providing her a lasting legacy as a beloved figure in Hungarian history. It also strengthened her influence within the empire and deepened the bond she shared with Hungary, a relationship that would become one of the few sources of happiness and stability in her otherwise turbulent life. The Mayerling incident was a tragic and scandalous event that occurred on January 30, 1889, involving Crown Prince Rudolf, the only son of Empress Sisi and Emperor Franz Joseph I. At the Mayerling hunting lodge near Vienna, Rudolf was found dead alongside his young lover, Baroness Mary Wetzira. The event shocked the Habsburg Empire and had profound effects on both the imperial family and European politics. Crown Prince Rudolf, 30 years old at the time, was a complex and sensitive figure. He had long struggled with feelings of isolation, depression, and a sense of disconnect from the strict, conservative world of the Habsburg court. Though married to Princess Stephanie of Belgium, his marriage was deeply unhappy, and he found solace outside his marital life. Rudolf was progressive and politically liberal, holding views that frequently clashed with his father's conservative policies. These internal and external pressures took a toll on his mental health. In the months leading up to the incident, Rudolf began a relationship with 17-year-old Baroness Mary Wetzira. They reportedly shared a deep, but troubled bond, as Mary was equally enamored and, like Rudolf, felt estranged from her family's expectations. Rudolf, plagued by both personal and political frustrations, sought an escape from his duties and conflicts with his father. On the night of January 29, 1889, Rudolf and Mary arrived at Mayerling, where Rudolf reportedly proposed a suicide pact, a last, desperate attempt to escape his troubles. Early the next morning, the two were found dead. The initial reports were vague, leading to widespread rumors about the nature of their deaths. Official statements suggested it was a murder-suicide, while others speculated it was a double suicide. The Habsburgs attempted to suppress information about the incident, fearing damage to the dynasty's reputation. The Mayerling incident devastated Empress Sisi, who had already endured personal struggles and the loss of her daughter Sophie years before. The death of her only son intensified her grief and sense of isolation, casting a shadow over the remainder of her life. Franz Joseph was also profoundly affected, though he sought solace in his duties and conservative governance. The Mayerling incident had long-lasting consequences for the Habsburg Empire. With Rudolf's death, the direct line of succession was disrupted, and the throne eventually passed to Franz Ferdinand, whose assassination in 1914 would trigger World War I. The incident thus marked a turning point in both the Habsburg family's legacy and European history, becoming a tragic symbol of the pressures and tragedies of royalty. Empress Sisi of Austria was assassinated on September 10, 1898, in Geneva, Switzerland, by an Italian anarchist named Luigi Lucchini. The event shocked Europe and marked a tragic end to the life of a figure who had been both adored and scrutinized throughout her life. At the time of her assassination, Sisi was traveling incognito, seeking a quieter life away from the pressures of the Habsburg court and the tragic losses she had endured, including the death of her son, Crown Prince Rudolf, nearly a decade earlier. She often traveled to various European cities for leisure, and her trips were characterized by a desire for freedom and anonymity. On that fateful day, Sisi was staying at the Beau Rivage Hotel in Geneva and was preparing to board a steamship to continue her travels. As she walked along the promenade, Lucchini approached her, armed with a small, sharpened file. He was initially seeking to assassinate another royal, but upon spotting Sisi, he seized the opportunity to attack her instead. Lucchini lunged at Sisi, stabbing her in the chest. Despite her immediate reaction, she initially did not realize the severity of her injury. After the attack, she continued on her way to the ship, but soon collapsed from blood loss. Emergency medical assistance was summoned, but Sisi died shortly after from the deep stab wound. The assassination sent shockwaves through Europe. Lucchini was quickly apprehended and expressed no remorse for his actions, claiming that he sought to kill a member of the nobility to make a statement against the oppressive nature of monarchy. He was ultimately sentenced to life in prison, where he later died by suicide. Sisi's death was met with widespread mourning. Her funeral was attended by thousands, and she was buried in the imperial crypt in Vienna, alongside other members of the Habsburg family. The assassination had profound effects on the Habsburg Empire, highlighting the rising tide of political unrest and the growing power of anarchist movements in Europe at the time. Empress Sisi is remembered not only for her tragic end but also for her complex life, her struggles with mental health, her advocacy for Hungary, and her lasting legacy as an iconic figure in European history. Her life story continues to captivate audiences, symbolizing the challenges faced by women in positions of power during a tumultuous period in history. Empress Sisi of Austria, also known as Elizabeth, left behind a multifaceted legacy that extends beyond her tragic life and death. Her influence can be seen in various cultural, social, and historical contexts, making her an enduring figure in European history. Sisi was renowned for her beauty and fashion sense. She became an icon of elegance in the 19th century, with her long hair, slim figure, and exquisite clothing setting trends across Europe. Sisi's fashion choices, such as her preference for tight corsets and luxurious fabrics, influenced the styles of the time. Her image as a fashion icon persists, and her life has inspired numerous fashion exhibitions and retrospectives. Sisi's life has been the subject of countless books, films, and television shows. The most notable representation is the Sisi trilogy of films released in the 1950s, starring Romy Schneider as Sisi. These films romanticized her life, focusing on her fairy tale marriage to Emperor Franz Joseph I and her struggles within the rigid Habsburg court. While they took liberties with historical accuracy, they contributed significantly to Sisi's mythos and popularized her image as a tragic yet glamorous figure. Sisi's struggles with the constraints of her royal role have been interpreted through a feminist lens. Her desire for freedom, autonomy, and self-expression resonates with modern audiences. Many view her as a symbol of the struggle against the limitations imposed on women in the 19th century. Her longing for personal space and her frequent absences from the court reflect a quest for identity beyond her roles as a wife and mother. Sisi's relationship with Hungary and her support for its autonomy during her reign helped foster a sense of national identity. Her efforts in bridging cultural divides contributed to the stability of the Austro-Hungarian Empire during a time of rising nationalist sentiments. Her legacy as a beloved figure in Hungary endures, and she is often remembered as an ally of the Hungarian people. Sisi's struggles with mental health and her coping mechanisms resonate with contemporary discussions about mental health awareness. Her journey reflects the challenges faced by those dealing with anxiety and depression, even within privileged circles. This aspect of her life has led to increased interest in her personal story, inviting empathy and understanding from modern audiences. Sisi's life and legacy have become a significant draw for tourism in Austria and Hungary. Historical sites, such as the Sisi Museum in the Hofburg Palace, the GDLL Palace in Hungary, and various memorials dedicated to her, attract visitors keen to learn more about her story. Events celebrating her life, including exhibitions and historical reenactments, continue to engage the public's interest. Sisi remains a figure of fascination in popular culture, inspiring novels, biographies, and documentaries that explore her life from various angles. Her tragic end and complex character evoke a timeless allure, prompting ongoing discussions about her legacy in history and culture. In summary, Empress Sisi of Austria's legacy is multifaceted, blending elements of beauty, tragedy, cultural representation, and historical significance. She remains an iconic figure whose life story continues to captivate and inspire generations, reflecting broader themes of femininity, autonomy, and resilience.